Her father sold her. Outside a saloon, a silent man paid in furs and said, "You're coming with me." The mountain choice, Brimstone, Colorado Territory, summer of 1876. The town didn't just smell bad. It reeked of something deeper, something rotten at its core. Sweat and gun oil and cheap whiskey, yes, but also desperation. The kind that clung to skin like a film you couldn't wash away. Dust hung in the air, thick as fog, settling into lungs and throats. The streets were crooked, built without plan or care, winding between hastily erected buildings that leaned into each other like drunks after last call. On the rickety steps of the Copper Crown Saloon, a transaction was taking place. Not for land, not for cattle, not for gold, though gold was what made Brimstone exist at all. This was something else, the selling of a woman. Mara Calloway stood between her father and brother, her spine rigid as iron, her face a mask. She was 23 years old, which her father said made her an old maid, a burden, a waste of food. Her skin was dark from years under the sun, her hands rough with calluses that would never soften, her frame lean and angular from labor. But her eyes were different. They were steady and defiant, holding a fire that dared anyone to tell her she was nothing. Cyrus Calloway spat tobacco into the dirt and addressed the gathering like a man selling livestock. "She's no use to us," he announced, his voice carrying over the murmur. "Can't land a husband, can't bring in a dowry, can't give me a grandson to carry the name. One less mouth to feed is a blessing, far as I'm concerned." Beside him, her older brother Jasper smirked, arms crossed. "You'll get a good worker," he added, looking at the prospective buyer with amusement. "Long as you don't mind a sharp tongue. She's too proud for her own good. Always has been." Across from them stood Silas Greer, the saloon keeper, his red face glistening with sweat and whiskey even in the morning hours. He barked out a laugh and slapped his round belly. From his coat, he pulled a leather pouch heavy with coins. It clinked when he set it down, drawing hungry looks from the crowd. "Don't mind a bit of pride," Silas said, voice thick with satisfaction. "I'll teach her what it's worth soon enough. Here, this is more than she's worth, but I'm feeling generous today." He turned his greasy smile toward Mara, his eyes crawling over her like insects. "Get in the wagon, girl." A rough hand seized her arm. Silas's fingers dug into her skin, but Mara did not scream. She did not cry out. She only turned her head slowly, deliberately, and looked at her father. In his eyes, she searched for something. Regret, maybe. Hesitation. But there was nothing. Only relief. The crowd pressed closer, their voices rising in crude remarks and laughter. Miners, drunks, cowhands, all hungry for entertainment. "Lucky you, Silas," someone shouted. "Bet she'll clean up real nice once you break her in." Mara's jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Inside her chest, fury and shame twisted together like tangled wire, cutting deep. But she stood tall. She refused to let them see her break. Then, at the edge of the crowd, near the general store, a shadow moved. A man stepped forward. He moved slowly, but there was sureness in his stride, a deliberate weight to each step, like a mountain that had decided to walk. His buckskin clothes were worn soft from years of use, stained with dirt and blood and weather. A hunting knife rode his hip, and a heavy satchel of hide hung from his shoulder. His beard was thick and dark, shot through with gray, and his eyes were hidden beneath the brim of a weather-stained hat. He said nothing at first, just walked. The crowd parted for him without thinking, some instinct telling them to give this man room. He stopped before Silas Greer, and for a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Silas's smile faltered. "What do you want, Thorne?" The man, Thorne, set his satchel on the table beside the bag of coins. It landed with a solid thud. Inside were furs, thick and well-cured. Beaver, mink, fox. The labor of an entire winter, maybe longer. Finally, Thorne spoke. His voice was low, rough from disuse, but it carried. "If she's useless to you," he said, looking not at Silas, but at Cyrus Calloway, "then I'll take her. Not for pouring drinks, not for bearing sons. I'll build her a roof. If she wants it, she can call it home." The crowd went silent. Even Silas blinked, his mouth hanging open like a fish pulled from water. Cyrus sputtered, his face turning red. "You can't just—" "I just did," Thorne said. He turned then, shifting his gaze to Mara. His eyes, though shadowed by the brim of his hat, were not cruel. They were not hungry. They held something she had never seen in a man's eyes before. Permission. Choice. Freedom. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. "You can walk away right now if you want. I won't stop you. But if you'd rather leave with me, I'll see to it. You won't be treated like property again. That I promise." Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. Her throat felt tight, her hands cold despite the summer heat. For the first time that day, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt a crack in the suffocating weight pressing down on her. Slowly, she nodded. Thorne turned without another word, and Mara followed. One step, then another, away from the wagon, away from the crowd, away from the father and brother who had sold her for coins like she was nothing. No one stopped them. Brimstone watched in silence, unsure if they had just witnessed a rescue, or a rebellion, or something else entirely. The trail leading out of town wound through scrub brush and rock, climbing steadily into the Black Hills. Thorne walked with the same steady pace, his boots crunching on gravel. Behind him, Mara rode a stubborn pack mule, gripping the worn saddle with hands that didn't quite know how to relax. She waited for it. The change. The moment when his kindness would crack and reveal what lay beneath. The harsh word. The rough hand. The demand. But Thorne said nothing. He just walked. Hours passed. The sounds of Brimstone faded, replaced by the rustle of wind through pine branches and the distant call of birds. The air grew cleaner, sharper, tasting of resin and stone instead of sweat and rot. For the first time in years, Mara was beyond the reach of her father's voice, beyond the leering eyes of men who measured her worth in coins. Fear and relief tangled inside her, impossible to separate. At midday, Thorne stopped beside a narrow stream, He knelt, filled a battered tin cup, and held it out to her without a word. "Drink, me," he said. Mara hesitated. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked, but trust was not something she had in abundance. Thorne didn't press. He just waited, the cup steady in his hand. Finally, she took it. The water was sharp and cold, cutting through the dust in her throat. She drank deeply, then handed the cup back. Thorne refilled it and drank only after she had finished. When night fell, they reached a small clearing carved out of the forest. A rough frame of logs stood at the center, half finished, its walls rising to shoulder height. The roof was a patchwork of canvas and pine branches, held down with rope and stone. This was no cabin. Not yet. It was a skeleton, a promise, a beginning. Thorne stopped and turned to face her, his features lit by the last rays of dying sunlight. "This isn't comfort," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. "Not safety. Not yet. But there's room here for a cabin, a real one. You can stay tonight, and tomorrow we start building. Or at first light, I'll take you back to town." Mara's voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "Why would you give me that choice?" Thorne looked at her for a long moment. "Because it's yours." No man had ever spoken to her that way. Not her father, who saw her as a failed investment. Not her brother, who saw her as a burden. Not a single soul in Brimstone. She sat by the fire as Thorne built it up, wrapping herself in his old coat, the fabric rough but warm, smelling of smoke and leather. He served her beans and jerky from his pack, handing her the tin plate first, taking his own portion only after she had eaten. And when the stars began to wheel above them, cold and distant and infinite, Thorne carried his bedroll to the lean-to just outside the main structure. "You can sleep inside," he said, nodding toward the canvas-roofed frame. "It leaks some when it rains hard, but it'll hold. You'll be safe." Mara started to speak, then stopped. Thorne gave a short nod, as if he understood the question she couldn't ask. "I'll be out here," he said. And so, for the first time in her life, Mara Calloway lay down in the dark and closed her eyes and drifted into sleep without fear. The days stretched long as summer deepened over the mountains. Mara woke each morning to the smell of pine and the sound of bird song, the air cool and clean in her lungs. Her hands, which her father had called too soft and useless, began to change. Calluses formed, then hardened. Blisters rose and burst and healed into tougher skin. She split wood with an axe that felt impossibly heavy at first, then learned to let the weight do the work. She hauled stones from the creek bed, their surfaces smooth and cold, fitting them into the foundation Thorne had laid. She mixed mud and straw, sealing cracks between logs, her arms aching by midday, but growing stronger with each passing week. Beside her, Thorne worked with the quiet precision of a man who had built things all his life. He showed her with gestures more than words how to brace beams, how to fit logs so tight a knife blade couldn't slip between them, how to angle a roof to shed snow and rain. He didn't command. He didn't correct with irritation or impatience. He simply worked, and in his silence, Mara found something she had never known. Space. Room to breathe. permission to be. At night, they sat by the fire. Thorne always served her first. A tin plate of whatever he'd cooked, beans or venison or cornmeal mush, before taking his own portion. When the meal was finished and the dishes scraped clean, he would carry his bedroll outside, leaving her the shelter of the cabin's 4 walls and canvas roof. He never asked for anything, never hinted, never pressed. And slowly, very slowly, the knot of tension in Mara's chest began to loosen. One evening, as the fire burned low and shadows danced across the clearing, Mara found herself asking the question that had been building for days. "Were you always up here, in the mountains?" Thorne shook his head, his eyes fixed on the flames. "No. I was a carpenter down in the valley. Built barns, porches, coffins. Had a little house near the Arkansas River. Nothing fancy, but it was solid." "What happened?" Mara asked softly. Thorne's jaw tightened. He stirred the coals with a stick, sparks rising into the night. "I took a wife. Her name was Clara. She had a laugh that sounded like water over stones, loved birds, used to feed the sparrows from her hand every morning." He paused, the silence stretching between them. "Lost her and the boy to cholera. Spring of '72. After that, I didn't see much reason to hear myself talk anymore. Came up here where the only voices were wind and water." Mara sat quietly, the fire crackling and popping as pine sap caught flame. Then, almost without meaning to, her own voice came, softer than she intended. "My father said I was born wrong. Not pretty enough to catch a husband. Not quiet enough to be tolerable. Not fertile enough to be useful." She swallowed hard. "My mother used to give me scraps of Bible pages. She'd teach me letters in secret. When he found out, he burned them. Said no man wanted a wife who could outread him. Said reading was for men and whores." Thorne stirred the coals but didn't interrupt. "I only remember a handful of words now," Mara admitted, her voice thick. "The rest just faded." Thorne looked at her then, really looked at her, and set down the stick. He rose, walked to his pack, and pulled out a flat piece of smooth wood he'd been saving for a shelf. With a stick of charcoal, he wrote in careful, deliberate strokes, "Mara." He handed it to her. "Then we'll fix that." She blinked, not understanding at first, then felt something crack open inside her chest. Slowly, carefully, Thorne showed her each letter. How the M stood tall. How the A formed a peak. How the R curved. How the last A mirrored the first. Her fingers trembled as she took the charcoal and copied the letters below his, her strokes uneven and uncertain, but hers. She stared at the marks for a long time, her name written twice on weathered wood, then pressed the board to her chest like she could absorb it into her bones. It was the first thing she had ever truly owned, with her name upon it. By the 3rd week, the cabin stood with walls that didn't shift in the wind and a roof that turned rain. Mara planted wildflowers near the front steps, yellow and purple blooms she'd dug up from the meadow below. Her hands worked the earth, and for the first time in her life, she felt something close to joy. Not happiness, not yet. but the absence of dread, the possibility of something better. But joy in the West was always borrowed time. One afternoon, the sound of hooves shattered the mountain stillness. Mara was inside, sweeping the dirt floor smooth, when she heard them. Her body went cold. She moved to the window, peering through the gap in the logs, and her stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. 2 riders. Her father, Cyrus, and her brother, Jasper. Their faces were hard, twisted with contempt. Their eyes sharp with the kind of ownership that didn't fade just because you'd walked away. Cyrus dismounted heavily, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He looked at the cabin, at the flowers, at the neat stack of firewood, and sneered. "Well, look at this," he said loudly. "I knew she'd end up crawling in the dirt somewhere, but I didn't expect her to crawl up a mountain to do it." Thorne stepped out onto the porch, an axe in his hand, the blade resting low but ready. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "You're not welcome here." Cyrus barked a laugh. "She's my daughter, blood. You think you get to say what's what?" "She's not your property," Thorne answered. Jasper swung off his horse, spat into the dirt, and fixed Thorne with a cold stare. "She's a debt, a mouth we fed for 23 years, and now there's a miner up in Helena offering 10 head of cattle and $50 for a wife. Good offer. We've come to collect." Thorne didn't flinch. "If she wants to go with you, she can. I won't stop her." Cyrus smirked, looking past Thorne to the cabin. "You think she's your wife now? You think you get to play house with damaged goods?" Thorne's eyes didn't waver. "I think she's a person. That's more than you ever treated her as." Inside the cabin, Mara's legs trembled, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She could stay hidden. She could let Thorne handle this. But deep down, in the part of her that had been crushed and beaten and told she was nothing, she knew this moment belonged to her. The door creaked as she pushed it open. She stepped out into the sunlight, her chin lifted, her hands stained with dirt from the flowers she'd planted. She looked at her father, then at her brother, and felt something shift inside her. "I'm not going with you," she said. Cyrus blinked, as if he hadn't heard right. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Her voice rang out clear across the clearing, stronger than she'd ever heard it. "I'm not for sale. Not anymore." Jasper moved forward, his hand going to his belt, but Thorne shifted, the axe rising slightly, the message clear. Jasper stopped. Cyrus's face twisted with rage, his voice rising. "Ungrateful bitch. After everything we did for you, you sold me," Mara cut in, her voice cracking, but not faltering. "You didn't raise me. You tolerated me. You waited until I was worth something to someone, and then you sold me like livestock." The words hung in the mountain air, sharp and undeniable. From the tree line, a few trappers who traded with Thorne had stopped to watch. Cyrus noticed them too, his bravado cracked. "You'll regret this, girl," he spat. Mara met his eyes without flinching. "Maybe, but it'll be my regret." There was a long, tense silence. Then Cyrus cursed, grabbed his horse's reins, and hauled himself into the saddle. Jasper glared at Thorne one last time, then followed. Their figures shrank into the trees, swallowed by shadow and distance. She exhaled, her knees weak, but she stayed upright. She had chosen. For the first time in her life, she had chosen. And no one could take that from her. Thorne set the axe back against the porch railing. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The mountain had heard her words, and so had he. That night, Mara found him by the fire. She sat down across from him, close enough to feel the heat. "Thank you," she said. Thorne looked up, his eyes tired but steady. "You don't owe me thanks." "I know," Mara said, "but I'm giving it anyway." The mountain turned white early that year. Snow clung to the pines like wool, heavy and thick. The stream froze in places, its surface slick and treacherous. Thorne hunted each morning, but winter in the Sangre de Cristo range was cruel, and game grew scarce. One evening, long after the sun had slipped below the ridge, Mara heard the panicked bray of their mule. She rushed outside and saw Thorne stumbling up the trail. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and spreading. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight against pain. "Thorne," she cried, running to him. "It's not deep," he grunted, but his voice was weak. "Bull elk. Got me with an antler, just a graze." But the blood told a different story. Mara dragged him inside, her arms straining under his weight, and laid him on the bed. She pressed rags to the wound, her hands shaking. The gash was long, running from his ribs to his hip, ragged and deep. For days, Thorne could hardly move. He lay in the bed, feverish and pale, his body fighting infection. Mara became the strength of the cabin. She split wood until blisters tore open on her palms and bled. She hauled water from the stream, breaking through ice with a rock. She mended clothes by firelight, kept the flames alive through the night, cleaned his wound with whiskey that made him hiss through his teeth. And at night, when the wind howled outside and snow piled against the door, she sat beside him and read. She stumbled over the words he'd taught her, tracing letters with her finger on the boards he'd carved, speaking them aloud like prayers. One night, as she stitched a fresh bandage with trembling fingers, Thorne's eyes opened. He watched her in the firelight, her face pale with exhaustion, her hands raw, but her jaw set with determination. "You're stronger than this whole mountain," he murmured. Mara blinked, tears welling in her eyes. "Why would you say that?" "Because it's true." His voice was rough but certain. "I've seen storms split trees in half, seen rocks give way to ice, but not you. You don't break." Her head dropped, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. For the first time in her life, someone had called her strong. Thorne reached out, his hand closing gently over hers. The fire burned steady between them, warming more than just the room. By spring, Thorne could walk again. The snow melted into rushing streams, green buds spread across the hills, and the world came back to life. The cabin stood solid, and flowers bloomed near the steps, returned from roots that had survived the winter. One afternoon, 3 riders came up the trail. Prospectors from the south, their horses loaded with equipment. Their leader, a man named Reed, tipped his hat and dismounted. He handed Mara a folded piece of paper. "We've got a claim down near Trinidad," he said. "Need someone who can read receipts, keep ledgers, handle correspondence. Pays $20 a month, plus room and board. You'd be the first woman hired for her mind instead of—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Mara's chest tightened. A real job. Independence. Freedom from debt, from dependence, from the fear that she was still just property in a different form. That night, she sat by the fire, the paper in her hands, staring at the words she could now mostly read. Thorne carved cedar beside her, his knife moving in slow, deliberate strokes. Finally, he set down the wood and placed something next to her. A small, hand-carved map, intricate and detailed, showing the trail from the cabin down to the valley. "If you want to go," he said quietly, "this will take you. Easiest route after the snow melts." Mara stared at the map, her throat tight. "And if I don't want to go?" Thorne's eyes met hers. "Keep it anyway, so you'll always know the way back." She looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for the thing she feared most. The command, the expectation, the invisible chain. But there was none. Only honesty. "Aren't you going to stop me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Say something." Thorne's expression softened. "You're not mine to keep, Mara. That's the whole point." 2 mornings later, Mara stood at the edge of the trail as the wagon rattled into view. Reed waved from the driver's seat. "You ready, miss?" She clutched the carved map in one hand, the job offer in the other. Her heart pounded. This was freedom. Real freedom. Then she looked back at the cabin, at the flowers, at Thorne standing on the porch, his hands loose at his sides, his face calm. Waiting. Not hoping. Not demanding. Just waiting. Mara shook her head. "No." Reed frowned. "You sure? This is a good opportunity." "I know," Mara said, "but I already live where I want to be." She turned, walked back up the slope, and stopped in front of Thorne. She pressed the map into his palm and smiled. The first real smile he'd ever seen from her. "Turns out I don't need it," she said. "I'm already home." Thorne didn't smile back. He never did. But his eyes said everything words couldn't. That spring, the cabin became something more than shelter. Mara laid chalk and slate on the long wooden table Thorne had built, and children from the valley began to come. They arrived in the mornings, carrying eggs and corn and dried meat as payment, their faces scrubbed clean, their eyes wet with curiosity. Mara's voice filled the cabin, clear and steady, teaching what had once been denied to her. And when she looked up from the table, she often found Thorne watching from the porch, carving small stools for the children. On a Sunday morning in late spring, beneath the tallest pine on the ridge, the valley folk gathered. Mara wore a white dress stitched from flour sacks, wildflowers braided into her dark hair. Thorne stood beside her in a clean shirt, his beard trimmed neat for the first time in years. Mara took Thorne's hands, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I used to believe I was nothing, that my worth came only from what others could take from me. But this man didn't take. He built. He built me a cabin, yes. But more than that, he gave me a place to stand, a name to carry, a life I chose. Thorne's voice cracked as he answered, I have built many things, barns, coffins, porches, but nothing was ever finished until you. Today, I call you my wife, not because you're mine, but because you made this place a home. The crowd cheered, and when Thorne slipped the hand-carved wooden ring onto Mara's finger, the forest itself seemed to still in reverence. That night, for the first time, there was no bedroll outside, no separation, no walls between them, just two people who had chosen each other, again and again, until the choosing became as natural as breathing. 3 years passed. The cabin grew. Thorne added a second room, then a small barn for the animals that accumulated. Mara's school expanded, children coming not just from the valley, but from homesteads miles away. But the world beyond the mountain did not stay still. One autumn morning, Mara woke to find Thorne standing at the window, his body tense, his hand resting on the rifle he kept near the door. What is it? Riders, Thorne said quietly. 6 of them. Mara moved to the window and felt ice slide down her spine. At the front of the group rode Silas Greer, the saloon keeper who had tried to buy her 3 years ago. Behind him rode 5 men, hired guns by the look of them. They stopped in the clearing, and Silas dismounted slowly. Thorne, he called, come on out. We need to talk. Thorne stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but not raised. Mara followed. Silas smiled coldly. Heard you've been doing well up here. Got yourself a nice little setup, built on a debt you never paid. Thorne's voice was flat. I paid. Furs. More than you were offering. To Cyrus Calloway, maybe, Silas said, but not to me. See, I had an agreement with him. I paid for the girl. Then you took her. That's theft, far as I'm concerned. She's not property, Thorne said. Silas's smile widened. Law says different. He pulled out a paper. Got a writ from Judge Mercer down in Brimstone. Says I got legal claim to compensation. You give me $200, we call it square. Otherwise, he gestured to the men behind him. We'll be taking what's owed. Mara felt rage flood through her. You have no claim on me. Silas looked at her like she was a dog that had learned to speak. Didn't ask you, girl. This is between men. Before Thorne could respond, Mara stepped forward. No, it's not. I'm standing here. I'm the one you think you own. So if you have something to say about my life, you say it to me. Silas's expression darkened. You got bold, didn't you? Freedom did that, Mara said. And you're not taking it. Silas's hand moved to his belt, and instantly the 5 men behind him shifted, hands going to their rifles. Thorne raised his own weapon, but the odds were clear. 6 against 2. Don't be stupid, Thorne, Silas said. Put the rifle down and we'll settle this civilized. We don't have $200, Mara said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Then I guess we got a problem, Silas said. He looked at Thorne. I'll give you 1 week to come up with the money. After that, we come back, and we take what's owed. The woman, the cabin, the livestock, all of it. He mounted his horse. Should have stayed in that wagon, girl. Would have been easier for everyone. Then they were gone. Thorne lowered the rifle slowly. We need to leave. Tonight. Head north, into Montana Territory. Mara shook her head. No. We built this. We earned this. I won't run. They'll come back, Thorne said. And when they do, they'll kill me and take you anyway. Mara looked at the cabin, at everything they had made from nothing. Then we fight. $200 is impossible, Mara finished. I know, but there's another way. The next morning, Mara rode down into the valley alone. She stopped at every homestead, every trapper's camp, every small settlement within a day's ride. At each place, she spoke the same words. 3 years ago, I was sold like cattle in Brimstone. A man named Thorne gave me a choice when no one else would. He built me a home. I built a school. I taught your children to read, to write, to know they're worth more than what others say they are. Now a man from Brimstone says he owns me, says the law's on his side. He's given us a week to pay $200 or he'll take everything. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for help. At the first homestead, the family stared. Then the man, whose daughter Mara had taught, disappeared into his house and returned with $3 in coins. It's all we got, he said. But it's yours. At the second, a widow gave her a silver locket. It was my mother's. Might be worth something. At the third, fourth, fifth, the story was the same. A few dollars here, a piece of jewelry there, a hunting rifle, a saddle. By the time Mara returned 3 days later, she had gathered $73 worth of goods and coin. It wasn't enough. Thorne met her at the door, his face grim. Even if we sell everything we own, we won't make $200. Mara set the satchel on the table. Then we make them understand we're not worth the trouble. We make sure everyone in 3 territories knows what Silas Greer is trying to do. That night, Mara wrote letters by candlelight. Her handwriting was still uneven. The words sometimes misspelled, but the message was clear. She wrote to every newspaper she knew, every judge, every lawman, every person of influence Thorne could name. She told the story of what had happened, of how she'd been sold, of how Thorne had offered her freedom, of how they'd built a life and a school. She told them about Silas Greer's claim, about the bought judge, about the hired guns. She ended each letter the same way. If this is legal, then the law is a mockery. If good people stand by and let it happen, then we are no better than the men who sell human beings like livestock. Thorne read the letters, then looked at her with something like awe. You think this will work? I think we're about to find out, Mara said. The week passed like years. Every morning, Mara expected to see riders on the trail. Every night, Thorne slept with his rifle beside the bed. The children still came for lessons, their parents anxious but defiant. On the 7th day, riders appeared on the ridge, but not Silas Greer. These were different men. At the front rode a U.S. Marshal, his badge catching the sunlight. Behind him were a dozen valley folk, armed and grim-faced, The marshal dismounted and approached. "You Thorne?" "I am." "And you're Mara Calloway?" "I am," Mara said. The marshal pulled a paper from his coat. "Got orders from the territorial governor. Seems your letters reached some important people. Judge Mercer's been removed from the bench pending investigation. Silas Greer's writ has been declared invalid. You're both free and clear." Mara's knees went weak. "What about Greer?" The marshal's expression hardened. "They're being escorted out of the territory as we speak, with a warning that if they come back, they'll be arrested for attempted extortion and kidnapping." Behind the marshal, one of the valley men grinned. "We made sure the message was real clear-like." The marshal tipped his hat. "Governor wanted me to tell you personally. What you did, standing up like that, writing those letters, it mattered. There's talk now about changing some laws, making it so women can't be sold like property." He remounted. "You take care up here. And ma'am, keep teaching those kids. Territory needs more people who can read and think for themselves." Then they were gone. Thorne exhaled, long and slow. "You did it." Mara shook her head. "We did it." That night, they sat by the fire, closer than they usually did, shoulders touching, hands intertwined. "I need to tell you something," Mara said softly. Thorne looked at her, waiting. "When you gave me that ring, when we stood under that pine tree, I meant those promises. But I was still scared, still waiting for you to change. I kept a part of myself held back, just in case." "And now?" Thorne asked. "Now I'm done holding back," Mara said. She turned to face him fully. "I love you. Not because you saved me, but because you showed me I could save myself. Not because you gave me a home, but because you showed me I could build one. I love you because when I look at you, I see the man who believed I was worth more than coins when no one else did." Thorne's hand tightened around hers. "I loved you the day you followed me out of Brimstone, when you could have walked away, but chose to trust me instead. I loved you when you split wood until your hands bled, when you sat by my bed and read to me when I was dying, when you stood up to your father and told him no. I loved you every day since." They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the night vast beyond the cabin walls. Then Thorne rose, held out his hand, and led her inside. 5 years later, the cabin had become a house. 2 stories now, with glass windows and a proper wood stove. The school had expanded into a separate building, with benches for 20 children and a small library of books. Mara stood at the front of the classroom, her belly round with their second child, teaching geography with a map Thorne had carved. Their daughter, Clara, named for the wife Thorne had lost, played in the corner with wooden blocks. She was 4 years old, bright-eyed and fierce. Outside, Thorne worked in the garden, now large enough to feed their family and provide vegetables for trade. He looked up as a wagon approached and recognized the driver. Reed, the prospector who had offered Mara a job years ago. Reed climbed down. "Come to see if you'd be willing to part with some of those potatoes. Also wanted to talk to your wife about something." They walked to the schoolhouse. When the children filed out, Mara turned and saw them. "Reed," she said warmly. "Been a while." "It has." He pulled a newspaper from his coat. "Wanted to show you this." Mara took the paper. The headline read, "From Property to Pioneer, How One Woman Changed Territory Law." Below was a detailed account of her story, of how her letters had led to new legislation protecting women's rights. "They're calling you a hero," Reed said. "Thought you should know." Mara stared at the paper, tears blurring her vision. "It's not just me, it's everyone who stood up." "Maybe," Reed said. "But you're the one who started it. You're the one who wouldn't back down." After Reed left, Mara found Thorne on the porch, Clara on his lap, reading to her from one of the books Mara had made. She sat beside them, leaning her head on Thorne's shoulder, watching their daughter's face as she listened, her small fingers tracing the letters. "We did good," Mara said softly. "We did," Thorne agreed. That night, after Clara was asleep, Mara stood at the window, looking out at the mountains. The Sangre de Cristo range stretched endlessly, dark and lone and beautiful. Somewhere down below, Brimstone still thrived. But up here, she had built something different. Not just a home, not just a school, but proof. Proof that a woman sold for coins could become something more. Proof that kindness was stronger than cruelty. Proof that freedom, once tasted, could never be forgotten. Behind her, Thorne's arms wrapped around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm grateful," Mara said, "for the man who walked out of the shadows and gave me a choice when no one else would, for the life we built, for the children we're teaching, for all of it. You gave me as much as I gave you," Thorne said. "You gave me a reason to build again, to hope again." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't, who had built something lasting from the wreckage of their pasts. Mara Calloway had been sold for coins outside a saloon in Brimstone, but she had bought herself back, not with money, but with courage, and in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who would come after, who would read her story and know that they too could choose freedom, could build something beautiful from nothing, could stand tall and say no. The woman who had once stood silent while men bartered over her body now stood as living proof that the human spirit, once given the smallest crack of light, could not be contained, could not be bought, could not be broken, and that was worth more than all the gold in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Leave a like, subscribe, and get notified to Western Stories and Tales for more epic tales from the untamed West.